Every neighborhood has its stories, its secrets, and its shadows. This story, starts with a simple game of hide-and-seek in a house that was anything but ordinary. The old house at the end of Elm Street had stood for decades, its creaking floors and whispered winds holding memories of a time long past. The children who dared to play there spoke of strange happenings, of doors that opened by themselves, and fleeting glimpses of something watching from the attic window. But it was just a game, right? Until it wasn't. The Jenkins house stood at the end of Maplewood Lane, abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up, and the air around it always seemed colder than the rest of the neighborhood. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to touch the front door, but no one ever stayed long. Whispers about the house's past were enough to send shivers down spines. Strange noises at night, flickering lights from within when no one was supposed to be there. But on one summer evening, a group of adventurous children decided to go further, to test the boundaries of fear and curiosity. Little did they know, their game of hide-and-seek would awaken something in the shadows, something that had been waiting. While the others counted to 30, Sam crept into the house. The wooden floors groaned under his sneakers, and the air smelled of mildew and something metallic, as if the house itself had bled for years. He paused at the threshold of the basement door, hesitation clawing at him, but the thrill of the dare pushed him forward. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled of rot, but it offered the perfect hiding spot, a dark corner where no one could easily find him. He settled into the shadows, heart pounding with excitement. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the house, a faint whisper, followed by a scraping noise from the farthest corner. Sam froze, thinking it was just his imagination, but then the floorboards above him creaked, and he realized he was no longer alone. Minutes passed. Sam waited, listening for footsteps or the sound of his friends calling out, but instead he heard something else, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails dragging across wood. It came from somewhere deeper in the basement, close enough that his breath caught in his throat. He tried to tell himself it was just the house settling, but the sound grew louder, closer. His heart raced as the air grew colder, the metallic scent becoming sharper, almost suffocating. He strained his ears, listening, and then, in the stillness, a voice, low, raspy, whispered from the dark corner, "You shouldn't have come." That's when he saw it. A figure, too tall to be any of his friends, moved across the basement wall. It didn't walk, it glided, its limbs bending in impossible angles. Adrenaline took over. Sam bolted up the stairs, his flashlight flickering wildly, the beam cutting through the darkness in frantic bursts. His footsteps echoed off the walls, growing louder and faster as he raced toward the door. Behind him, the growl twisted into a shrill, unnatural scream. Piercing, painful, a sound that made his ears ache and his blood run cold. The house seemed to shake, vibrating with fury. He reached the front door, hands shaking as he fumbled for the handle. Just as he yanked it open, a cold, bony hand brushed his shoulder, dragging an icy chill down his spine. Sam didn't look back. He pushed through the door and into the night, the scream fading into the distance, but the memory of that unnatural presence lingered, haunting him as he ran. What hides in the dark often stays there, waiting for the next game to begin. The basement, a place where shadows twist and breathe, waits for the curious, the brave, or the foolish. Would you have been brave enough to hide there in the cold and silence, knowing that not everything in the dark is part of the game? Some things are only waiting for you to make the first move. In every neighborhood there's always one house, the kind that stands out for all the wrong reasons. For Ryan and his friends, the empty house wasn't just a place to avoid. It was a warning, whispered from older kids who claimed they'd seen things that no one could explain. For Ryan, it was the ultimate hiding spot for a game of hide-and-seek. It was a warm summer evening, perfect for mischief. Ryan, a 16-year-old with something to prove, dared his friends to include the empty house in their game. The house had been abandoned for years, but Ryan saw it as a challenge. As they stepped inside, the air turned cold and heavy. The floor creaked underfoot, and a strange hum filled the air. When they reached the attic, a dragging sound echoed from within, followed by a whisper, Leave. Before they could react, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Something was watching, and it wasn't friendly. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of mold and decay. Dust hung in the air, catching the weak beam of his flashlight. Ryan moved quickly, searching for the perfect hiding spot. He found a narrow door at the end of a hallway, cracked open. Inside, the room was cold, the walls covered in strange symbols. A chill ran down his spine, but he ignored it. As he crouched in the corner, a crash echoed from upstairs, followed by slow footsteps. Then, a whisper brushed his ear. "You shouldn't be here." At first he thought it was the wind, but the sound had a rhythm, a heartbreaking cadence that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like a soft, mournful tapping, echoing through the house. Ryan's heart raced as he strained to hear, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The tapping grew louder, closer, and he realized it was coming from behind the wall. His breath caught in his throat. Whatever it was no longer just a noise. It was something alive. Against his better judgment, Ryan stepped out of the closet. He told himself it was just one of his friends trying to scare him. But deep down, he knew no one else had gone inside the house. The silence was deafening as he crept toward the source of the sound. His flashlight flickered and the tapping grew louder, now accompanied by a wheezing breath. It wasn't his friends. It wasn't human. As he entered a room, a rocking chair moved on its own, and a whisper rasped from the shadows. "Get out!" Ryan bolted, but the door slammed shut behind him. Something was following. Panic set in. Ryan bolted down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air felt thick, suffocating as he hurried toward the front door. But the laughter, high-pitched, distorted, began to grow louder, mingling with the thudding of footsteps behind him. His heart raced as he glanced over his shoulder, but there was nothing there. Yet the sound followed, relentless, closing in. Desperation surged through him. He grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The laughter grew more frantic, and the footsteps became a deafening roar, as if something was just inches away. Because sometimes the things left behind don't want to be forgotten. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was waiting, watching. When Ryan entered, he unknowingly stirred something trapped inside, something that craved attention. The laughter and footsteps were warnings. Some places should never be disturbed. The woods behind Grandma's house were quiet during the day, peaceful even. But when the sun set, they became something else entirely. For Mia, a summer game of hide-and-seek became a nightmare she'd never forget. Mia loved spending summers at her grandmother's house, where the woods were endless and the air smelled like pine and freedom. One warm evening, she and her cousins decided to play hide-and-seek before dinner. The game was always a favorite, with the tall trees and overgrown paths offering the perfect hiding spots. But this time, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods felt different, darker, quieter, as though something was watching. Mia hid near the edge of the forest, her heart racing, waiting for the seeker to come closer. The stillness of the air grew heavier, and then, in the distance, she heard a rustle, a movement that wasn't from any of her cousins. Something in the shadows shifted, and a cold chill ran down her spine. Was it just her imagination, or was the forest hiding more than she realized? Mia wanted the best hiding spot, far from where anyone would think to look. She found it in a hollow tree, its trunk wide enough to crouch inside, the dark space a perfect refuge. The cool, damp scent of the wood mixed with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. She sat still, listening to her cousins call out in the distance. Then a sharp crack echoed through the trees. The air thickened. The forest grew unnervingly quiet. Suddenly, a voice, low and eerie, whispered from deep within the tree, "You shouldn't be here." At first Mia thought it was one of her cousins trying to sneak up on her. But these steps were too slow, too heavy, the kind that seemed to drag across the forest floor. Her heart pounded as the footsteps drew closer, each step vibrating through the hollow tree. She held her breath, praying it was just her imagination. But then, the shadow of something large passed by the opening, blocking out the dim light. It paused, as if sensing her presence. Mia froze, too terrified to move. It was her cousin's voice, or at least it sounded like it. But something about it was wrong. Too perfect, too smooth, as if it were being mimicked, carefully crafted. "Mia, I know you're in there," it called, the tone unnervingly calm. Her blood ran cold, She hadn't heard anyone approach. She strained her ears, but the forest was eerily silent now, the usual sounds of birds and wind completely absent. The voice came again, closer this time, as if it was right outside the hollow tree. "Come out, Mia, we just want to play." She ran, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. The chill of the forest air whipped past her as she pushed through the underbrush, but no matter how fast she sprinted, the feeling of being pursued never eased. The thing behind her didn't run, it glided, its movements unnatural and impossibly fast, like it was floating just above the ground. The brush around her crackled, but it made no sound in the thing's wake. Every time she looked over her shoulder, it was closer, its voice, now distorted and hollow, whispering her name. She burst into the clearing, sobbing and gasping for air, her legs burning with exhaustion. Her cousins stood on the porch, their faces pale, staring at her with wide, confused eyes. They hadn't seen her since the game began. "Mia, where have you been?" one of them called out, but her eyes darted past them, frantically scanning the woods. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Her voice trembled as she gasped, "It followed me." But before she could finish, a cold, distorted whisper came from the trees behind her. "You shouldn't have come back." Mia never played hide-and-seek in the forest again. The memory of that night haunted her, and she often wondered what would have happened if she'd answered that voice, if she'd stepped out of the tree or called back. Some things are better left unknown.